Hello, darkness, my old friend. I've come to talk with you again.
I decided to pull the video I was working on last month because during editing I suddenly felt too bad about picking on someone who had suffered a serious head injury. So instead I turned my attention to someone who doesn't have brain damage but makes about as much sense. Meet Daniel from theTRUTHgroup. Yes, the same Truth group that was nominated for a Golden Crocoduck for creationist dishonesty. Actually, I'll let him introduce himself.
I am incredibly stupid.
Yes, it would certainly seem so, based upon some of the things he says in this video, and his general philosophy on scientific inquiry. Take this for example.
Science is just knowledge gained by systematic study. And that systematic study can be observation, experimentation, etc.
Okay, so far so good. Here's where it all goes rather wrong.
Unfortunately, there's a lot of people out there that are of the opinion that you're not allowed to talk about science unless you have some sort of a degree or a doctorate or something like that, which I find weird because by that same criteria, I wouldn't be allowed to talk about things like history or grammar.
Well, let's not get into his aptitude to discuss grammar, given that he just said criteria, not criterion. As for science, no, he's got it completely wrong. Nobody objects to the scientifically unqualified discussing scientific matters. How else are people to become educated in such subjects? People with scientific training object to the scientific misinformation of others. In my opinion, a truer word has never been spoken since Alexander Pope said, "A little learning is a dangerous thing." And surely it's not hard to understand why those who have an in-depth knowledge of a field, gathered through several years of hard study, countless exam papers and years of independent research, have to compete with someone who considers themselves an expert following a few hours of skim reading from the internet. A degree is simply a badge that indicates competence in the relevant subject. A science degree implies that the recipient has experience in conducting experiments, analysing their findings, and critically evaluating the scientific literature. So someone who has a degree, providing it's in a relevant area, should automatically gain more credibility than someone who doesn't in the absence of any other factors. As for why fewer people get het up about history or grammar, science has far greater power in affecting our appreciation of reality, so it's not something to be thrown around and twisted carelessly.
As a Christian, I agree with science.
Along with that beard, I'm finding it a real struggle not to respond to that comment.
Because see, not only do I enjoy science, but I enjoy the person who created science, and that of course would be God.
Enjoy? Whatever. Anyway, God did not create science. Science is the quest to discover knowledge about the nature and mechanics of reality. It's a mark of the curiosity and ignorance of human beings. An omniscient creator of reality would have neither of these traits. The same jaw-dropping stupidity can be heard when we move on to discussing the pendulum.
So who discovered the pendulum? Well, truthfully, God did. God created it back in the very beginning.
So God both invented and discovered the pendulum? I can only imagine that God is a rather forgetful or absent-minded creator, as if he created a lot of stuff, came back to it a few days later and said,
"What the? When did I make these? And more importantly, what are they?"
As for God inventing the pendulum, this is just plain daft again. Inventing is a uniquely human activity, and to suggest that God invented everything first is just laughable. Presumably, Adam and Eve would go to their respective jobs as a telephone sanitizer and a particle physicist, Adam by a cranoplan, Eve by monowheel, before returning home to enjoy a microwave meal before a pleasant evening at the virtual reality cinema. Now, to his credit, he does at least tell us that the history books, with all their factual propaganda, will tell you that Galileo invented the pendulum, but at the expense of such an atrocious gag that I'll spare you having to listen to it here. We're now starting to get into the main message here from Daniel, and I realise that what this video boils down to is a sermon with a religious message behind it. I'm really not too bothered with the spiritual side, but if you're going to sell a religious message coupled with a scientific one, at least get the factual bits right.
I predict that when I let go of this cup, it is going to hurl itself at the ground. Hey, 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 look at that. Bet you didn't know I was a prophet, did you?
Amazing. Now, of course, you and I both know the correct reasoning behind making such a prediction. A child of 5 knows the correct reasoning. The mentally subnormal know the correct reasoning. Daniel, meanwhile, doesn't. Let's see why.
If there is no such thing as a God, if there is no such thing as a designer, if there's no such thing in creative, special, intelligent design, then there's really nothing that we can study. Because I may drop the cup and gravity will work today, but tomorrow maybe gravity will pull away from the Earth. Who knows? It's crazy like that. But since God is still on his throne, I know that gravity is going to work 100% of the time.
How he managed to reach this philosophy without realising its flaws is beyond me. as is how the others of the Truth Group let him upload this brain-degrading crap. Let's start from the beginning. Science is simply the endeavour to explain the workings of the natural world. It relies on two key assumptions. One, that the natural world as we experience it really does exist, and that it's not an illusion. This is more of an axiom than an assumption. If you don't believe that anything exists, then presumably there isn't much point in doing anything. Two, that the natural world is constantly subject to a set of unchangeable physical laws. So how did we all know that the cup would fall to the ground? Because we knew that God's physical laws would cause it to happen? No, we knew it because we know from countless observations that all objects with mass are attracted to Earth. It's only when we can observe an effect occurring with such reliability that we can try to devise physical laws to explain the phenomenon as best we can. So therefore, reality is our starting point on which most of us build our scientific worldview. We can then induce natural laws that fit around this reality, which may or may not lead to the implication of a supernatural creator. Daniel, meanwhile, starts with the assumption that God does exist, that only then can natural laws exist, and such reality as we know it becomes feasible. This is a potentially dangerous point of view. What if tomorrow a scientist or philosopher were to come up with an undeniable piece of evidence or argument that disproved the existence of a God? Without the foundation of your worldview, does that mean that, in your mind, reality comes crashing down? Moreover, I want in particular to look at this statement.
Because I may drop the cup and gravity will work today, but tomorrow maybe gravity will pull away from the Earth. Who knows? It's crazy like that. But since God is still on his throne, I know that gravity is going to work 100% of the time.
How this idea can be justified, I've no idea. Scientific naturalists, like myself, put their trust in the idea that there are only the physical laws of the universe at work, and that these are impossible to violate. It's only with the existence of a supernatural, omnipotent being controlling the universe that we should start to be afraid of things like gravity reversing. Only a god would have the power to break the rules of physical reality. At this point, I imagine a lot of people responding, yes, God could break his own physical laws, but he never would because he wants to protect mankind. Well, if you take a few moments to look through the Bible, you'll quickly discover that God doesn't hold his own physical views in very high regard. For instance, an element is defined by the number of protons in its nucleus. 6 means carbon, 16 means sulfur, 80 means mercury, etc. So when God turned Lot's wife into a pillar of salt, arguably the most bizarre, unbefitting and undeserved punishment of the Old Testament, he magically converted a human body, mostly carbon, hydrogen, oxygen and nitrogen, into sodium and chlorine, without the conditions usually required, i.e. several million degrees Celsius. Other biblical violations of physics, chemistry and biology include the rivers of Egypt turning into blood, the burning bush remaining unscathed, a virgin giving birth, oil self-multiplying, solid iron floating in water, Jesus walking on water, and numerous people being raised from the dead. A favourite miracle of mine is when Balaam's ass speaks, a feat which Daniel is close to replicating here. Miracles are, by their very definition, acts of the supernatural, so to believe in the events of the Bible should lead to uncertainty in the forces of nature, while naturalism is reassuring of a constant state of the universe as we know it, not the other way round. So that's pretty much all I have to say. As with the original video, the pendulum doesn't get much of a mention. The only other purpose it serves is that Daniel demonstrates that God's physical laws are so trustworthy that the pendulum's regular motion stops it from coming back and hitting him in the face. My only response to that is this. Here is Make Magazine's Kip K, sporting eerily similar facial hair, showing us how to make a double pendulum, with its famously chaotic and unpredictable motion. To quote a much hackneyed expression, where's your God now?